to that effort as well. So at this time, help me welcome Reno Charette to the stage.
Pivawoama. Good morning. My name is Reno, and I was raised by a special ed teacher. So in preparing for this presentation, her advice to me was, those are my people. I should have been there. She said, you need to do something. You need to demonstrate. You need to visualize. You need to have manipulatives, because that's what my people like to do with their students. So she said, don't just talk. Well, I come from higher ed where we mostly just talk. So I decided to put parts of my presentation into practice. And with 3 weeks to work with, I made this dress to represent what I'm going to speak about today. I knew there'd be a lot of you. I didn't know there would be this many of you. Good job. I dedicate 4,000 stitches to each one of you. I tried to imagine your faces as I sat at my sewing machine after work until the wee hours of the morning, all my Saturdays and my Sundays, imagining who you would be as mothers, fathers, teachers, administrators, community members, grant leaders, tribal leaders. And your faces are so much more beautiful than I imagined. Thank you for doing this kind of work. I don't like being up here. May I go down? Okay. How do I change my slides? I'll signal you. Okay, well, let's get a start. I wanted to speak with you about the importance of multiculturalism and how I envision that in education, community leadership, and how that might work for you as a parent or wherever you are in this continuum of change. So what does it mean? It means for schools that we have to increase the opportunities for cultural integration of the curriculum. Our kids need to see us in math and science. For students, it means increasing acknowledgement of their entire heritage. Thus, we have expanded identities and relevancies. In the picture that I submitted for this conference, I'm dressed in a Crow elk-tooth dress. Because I'm enrolled Crow, my mother's Crow, and we are a matriarchal tribe, I have to always present myself as a Crow woman. I have never been allowed to wear anything but Crow regalia. This dress is my first time ever to have the princess fringes and elements of the Northern Plains women's style of dresses that represents not only my actual heritage, but the people that invested in me on the Cheyenne Reservation where I grew up. There are elements of Crow and Cheyenne mixed together in this generic Northern Plains dress. And when I add my jingles and my deer toes to the hemline, it will also capture the element of being a Pebinah descendant of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa. For our parents, this idea of multiculturalism means increasing the importance of their involvement. Teachers cannot do this alone. They do not have the knowledge that you have, the connections that you have. They need you in the classroom. So I came up with a word for this, and the word I chose is a composite curriculum. Those of you that might have experience in being carpenters, composite wood is wood that includes other elements, and it's all glued together to make a new whole. And that's what I am seeing in the students that I'm serving. Because Indigenous people today are multicultural. We probably have always been. We were interconnected through elaborate trade routes extending in all 4 directions, wherever you start from your pueblos, from our native homelands, along the rivers in Montana. Everywhere, every direction you looked, there was a trade route. So our ancestors were well aware of diverse cultures. Next slide. This slide demonstrates and shows you an example of those indigenous trade routes. So when you see those old black and white pictures of Crow women wearing these shell ties in our hair, you know we knew somebody from the West Coast, because we're a high plains desert. We don't have mother of pearl in the Montana region, but our ancestors always had them on our regalia, on our everyday clothes and earrings. So that's just an example of how interconnected we are as indigenous people. Next slide. So the 4 major points I wanted to elaborate on today are the power of naming your world. You're truly the boss when you get to name it. And many of our tribal names for our landscape and our areas, and even who we are as people, have been renamed by the oppressors. I also want to talk about the power of thinking indigenously, thinking from your cultural worldview first, and then go out from that. The power of indigenous fusion. And what I mean by that is that I believe I'm a stronger woman because Cheyenne women taught me how to be Cheyenne. Because Crow women have insisted that I maintain certain standards of behavior that are appropriate for a Crow woman. Because of the other tribes that I've been associated with, married into the Blackfeet, lived next door to the Salish and the Kootenai, and have had the good fortune to be included in those cultures. They've become a part of my journey through life, and I've taken the good that they've offered and carried it with me as part of my character. So I am a living example of fusion. So I also want to talk about this in terms of it as a power of a composite competence, that we can be competent in several different cultural arenas to help each other. In my case, as a Crow woman with Cheyenne background, Blackfeet children, connections to the Salish Kootenai, and I'm also French. My last name is Charette. That was the big clue right there. Next slide. So in the power of naming, it establishes your authority. It's your empowerment. Many tribes have done this. The Salish Kootenai have renamed all the geographical regions on their reservation, and they're teaching it to their children. All signs along the highway are all in Salish and also in Kootenai. In Crow Agency, the home of my tribal government, all the street signs are in Crow. The only real issue with that is when your ambulance crew are non-Indian and they don't speak Crow and they're trying to find Biagada Street, it can present some issues. But the power of naming also reflects your perspective and what's relevant to you. So why would we have a street called Biagada, which means woman? That's a very powerful symbol in Crow culture for purity and home. The power of naming includes the interconnectedness to your culture, your philosophy, your spirituality, and your environment. And that gives meaning to your life. And that's what we want our children to have, is that meaning in their life that represents the culture that you moms are teaching them as infants, that you fathers are teaching them as they grow. And then the power of naming uses your language. And this can be a linguistically significant issue when we're trying so hard to save our languages, that if our children grow up knowing the names of things in our communities by our own tribal notion of what it is. The long-leggeds, the sticky mouths, the other words for elk and the bear. The power of naming embraces your ancestors and your heritage. Thus, it's a way of perpetuating your history. Among the Crow, Plenikoos was a revered leader. So the fact that we have a high school named after Plenikoos is significant to Crow children. In our non-Indian communities, we have schools that are named after Charles M. Russell and non-Indian historical figures. Let's go to another slide. So in naming your world, it anchors you to where you legitimately belong. So if things were named differently, this might describe where I come from. I live along the Elk River at the foot of the Pryor Mountains and in the shadows of the Rim Rocks. I am an Abzalaga of the River Crow Band, a member of the Ties the Bundle clan. I'm a voter in the Center Lodge, or the Reno district of the Crow Reservation, and raised on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, a mother of Blackfeet children, and a descendant of the Pebina Chippewa, and I'm a descendant of the Cherokee from the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky. So I celebrate my heritage in being the great-great-granddaughter of a moonshiner. There's some skill in that. Next slide. The colonization of our indigenous identity is an issue that we need to talk about, because the colonizers re-identified tribal nations by stripping us of our names for ourselves. It was done to break the spirit of the people, to berate them with negative prerogatives when you are now known by the name of your enemy. And what if today we had an enemy and we wanted to call them, you know, some like turkey trot or something, and then forever you're known as that. And that is, it's not good for your indigenous spirit. You want to be known by the power name that your own ancestors gave you. The colonizers also collapsed Native nations into a generic group of Indians. We didn't call ourselves that. That was somebody's mistake because they thought they were on a different continent. They didn't call us by our indigenous names. And we were forced to accept new religions, languages, and national allegiances that affect who we are today. Not that it's bad, but we need to acknowledge it. And an example is with the word redskins, which actually originated in the 1600s with the commercial bounty hunting for the bloody red skins and scalps of Native men, women, and children as proof of Indian kill. So we've come to a point in our association with the Europeans that some of the English language that is used to talk about us, describe us, and is part of what the dominant society believes is our identity. Through that process, we have become desensitized to certain words and references. Let's do another slide. I tried to pick some Native authors, particularly from Montana, to showcase. And according to Darcy McNichol, who's Salish, the right of Indigenous people to perpetuate themselves was denied by federal policy and action. Native nations might have wanted to improve their knowledge and skills to extend their control, but they weren't allowed those choices. In other situations, when a nation moves in on another nation, the process might be different than what we experienced. They get that natural selection of whether or not they want to participate in a new religion, to participate in a new form of education. We were not allowed those natural selection processes. It was forced on us in a very sudden way. When our ancestors resisted those moves, more coercive devices were imposed until they were wholly encumbered by alien controls. Our men were demoralized by not being able to take on the traditional ways of becoming a man. Our children were taken from us and put in boarding schools. So every time we tried to be activists or we tried to resist, we were shut down in a very severe, harsh way. We're not there anymore. We are on a new journey with much more skills in managing this dominant society. But what it's done to us has left